Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. This is your trigger warning. This podcast is raw. It is real and it doesn't sugarcoat what it means to survive trauma, abuse, mental health battles, or even the aftermath of living in survival mode for too damn long. What you hear on Survival Mode Disrupted includes unfiltered stories, graphic details, and a vulnerable truth that may trigger some of the audience. Please prioritize your emotional safety. If something feels too heavy, pause, breathe, come back when you're ready or not at all. Your healing is yours to honor. These episodes are based on lived experience, not therapy sessions or clinical advice. Listening does not replace mental health treatment or constitute a coach client relationship. If you're in crisis, please seek immediate help from a licensed professional or contact your local emergency services. This space is built with care, but it's also built for truth and built for disruption. Take what you need, leave the rest, and most of all, trust yourself. If this podcast speaks to your soul, you don't have to do this work alone. Feel free to join our free Facebook community for high achieving women ready to break cycles and heal out loud. Join us at Disrupting Survival Mode on Facebook, or grab the book that started this movement, Exiting Survival Mode, a raw step by step guide to help you identify, release, and rebuild from the survival patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. I am your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and today we have Jamie. Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for the time. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you. Yes, I'm Jamie Hughes. So I'm a psychologist, author, and trauma recovery coach. I've written 4 books on mental health issues. I had a academic published paper from my master's program. So that all sounds good and great, but the way I got here might surprise some people.
I'm so excited to have you here and to unpack this story of yours. So, how would you describe survival mode?
Survival mode is when our mind and our body are stuck in a way to try to both understand and avoid the trauma that we've been through at some point in our lives. And this can be from childhood trauma, it can be from something happened in adulthood, a natural disaster, a sexual assault, things like that. So your mind, one of our main primal functions is survival. And so when we go through something that's traumatic, extremely difficult, things that are repetitive, our brain starts trying to figure out, okay, how can we keep this from happening again? How can we be aware of this? Hypervigilance, that's definitely a sign of survival mode, where even if you don't think of it in those terms, you're constantly, judging and weighing people's actions and behaviors and words. So it's not always like being hyper aware of a situation, like when you go out in public. It's also just constantly scanning, constantly looking for a way to prevent being hurt by something similar to what you've already been through. And it can hurt us because it affects our relationships. It affects everything from your sleep, your health, your career. So yeah, survival mode's a tricky one and comes out in some ways that we're not always immediately aware of.
I agree. That lack of awareness is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. I think we do not have enough conversations about the residual impact of trauma.
Mhm,
Hence, a lot of people chalking things up to this is part of my personality. Well, no,
mhm.
actually, it's a trauma response. So
Yeah.
now I'm interested in your story to and through survival mode. What did that look like for you?
So mine started in childhood. My parents got divorced when I was just a baby, and I never even saw my dad, never heard a name, never saw a picture, nothing. I didn't even know I had a father. And so as I began to get older, my mom and I lived together, and I was 8 years old when she went into the hospital because she'd been sick for a little while. And so she went in for treatment. And one Saturday morning, I was sitting at home watching cartoons, and my grandmother was there visiting, and she came into the room and said that my mother had passed away, that she was not coming home. And I was just stunned. I froze. I didn't know how to process that information. I didn't even really have any feelings in that moment. I just sat there and continued to watch cartoons, zoned out. So my childhood trauma began then and just got worse after that. Uh, I ended up having to go live with my father, whom I, like I said, had never even seen or met. And it was very clear from day one that I was an intruder, that I was not wanted. This new town, this new family, this new school, this whole new world that I was thrust into, I was not welcome. And I grew up with uh, psychological and emotional abuse. I never had the chance to grieve. Was even I remember one time I was probably only 9, so it was shortly after the change. I remember one time that I started to miss my mom and was just very unhappy with the new environment and felt lonely and scared and started to cry. And my stepmom at the time was going to hug me and comfort me, and my dad chastised her and said, do not treat him like a baby. He's got to grow up. He's got to be a man. He can't just sit and cry all the time. And this was a 9-year-old boy whose mother had died, you know. So it was like that growing up. And so I started having depression, ended up being diagnosed at some point later with clinical depression. So that was a constant part of my life as a teenager. And the very first experience I had with any type of mental health treatment was when I was 18, and that was only because of a suicide attempt. I took 3 boxes of sleeping pills because I just couldn't go on anymore. I the weight, the emotional weight of life was just too heavy. I had lived in darkness for too long, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I took those 3 boxes of sleeping pills, but miraculously never even went to sleep. Ended up being found by someone that noticed there was something off, and I told them what I had done, and they called the ambulance, and I ended up going to the hospital. And like I said, that was the first time anyone had ever said to me, "Hey, this isn't just you. This is you have a condition. You have a you have a mental illness you're dealing with, and that's depression. Um, so my survival mode during all those years was just a lot of times it was just wandering around in the darkness, but sometimes it was grasping onto those rays of light that were there, like friendships. My grandparents from my mother's side, so my grandmother and grandfather, they were loving and supportive. Um, Little things I enjoyed, like music and art, science. I loved school. Didn't do very well in high school because it was hard to concentrate, hard to focus. I didn't really have much motivation. But then as I got into my early 20s, I just kind of reached a point to where I said, you know what, I just don't want to live like this anymore. And I want to do something different about it. Instead of having the suicidal tendency and ideation, I very fortunately decided to go into psychology and to learn, you know, why I was this way, what was going on with me. And I just fell in love with it and learned that, hey, I can help other people with these issues also. So that's how my journey began on the intentional aspect of healing and growth.
So much of your story I can relate to. I sat here and I was just captivated by this story. I didn't lose a parent, but both of my parents remarried after divorce. They got divorced when I was quite young.
Hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with my father about why they got a divorce. And he basically told me it was my birth
Oh,
without any
wow.
other explanation,
Wow.
which created this very intense heaviness for me because I was 7 at the time.
Hmm.
I didn't understand what he meant by that, and I
Hmm.
blamed myself.
Yes.
On top of that, they both married people that really didn't want anything to do with me.
Hmm.
And so I spent years having to navigate the world on my own, really. Like
Yeah.
they were present, but emotionally I was neglected.
Yeah.
And I too was diagnosed with clinical depression in my teenage years after a suicide attempt.
Mm.
Um, and I kind of felt that like after that, maybe my parents would pay attention to what's happening.
Hmm.
What happened was I lost a relationship with my father because having an honest conversation about what it was like growing up in his household was
Uh-huh.
too much for him to handle. So
Yep.
once again, I'm being discarded by my parents, the two people that owed me something, you know,
Yes.
which then created a whole like a snowball effect in my life of neglect, abandonment,
Hmm.
and me not being able to take control of my life because I really didn't have the tools, even though I was going to therapy. I went to therapy for years, but it was
Yeah.
me sitting on a couch, just
Hmm.
retelling my trauma.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a very small environment. Grew up in Bermuda. For those who don't know, Bermuda is 21 square miles. If
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know you, I know your cousin and I know all of I know your
Uh-huh.
family history. And the person that I was seeing was my aunt's godchild's mother.
Mm.
So, in order for me to feel comfortable, I didn't because I didn't trust that what
Right.
I was saying wasn't getting passed on.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
Um, So my journey to healing really didn't begin until I was able to leave that environment. Um,
Hmm.
and so sitting here listening to you, particularly, I got particularly moved around what you were saying about happening at 9 years old. One of the things that I've seen and I'm quite vocal about is the fact
Mhm.
that we are expected to pack away our human experience to
Mhm.
keep other people comfortable.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
your father declaring, don't comfort him. He needs to just, stop crying and get on with life.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. Because what that probably taught you was to pack your emotions away and don't
Mhm.
process them, which, as we know now,
Yeah.
is detrimental to healthy processing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it does. It's what I experienced in that moment was, instead of having a parent that would comfort me during a time of distress, I was taught that I should fear that person. And all through life, it affects, like you mentioned, a snowball effect. Those kind of things, follow you through life and affect your personal perception, affects your relationships later in adulthood. And one of those ways is you have this subconscious idea to, you know, you're trying to you're trying to get the validation from other people that you don't have for yourself and that you didn't get in childhood. And that validation being that, one, your emotions are important, you know, that someone cares about you, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and two, that it's okay to talk about those things. And there's a need in childhood, especially, of safety. And because you're young, that's the parent's job, is to keep you safe. And it's something that's just ingrained in us. That's every study that's been done, through psychological history has somehow led back to the treatment during childhood, whether we're talking about attachment theory, whether we're talking about, Freudian psychology, where your id and ego and everything is formed. It's all during childhood. And it goes back to, as a child, do you feel safe? Do you feel taken care of? And when those things are abused in some way, neglected in some way, it literally changes your brain and your nervous system. And so you grow up, and you have to, at some point, find a way to deal with that. You have to find a way first to acknowledge it. Then you have to find a way to work through it on yourself, for yourself. And then you have to find the way to apply those things into your life, and especially your relationships with other people.
Hmm. That first, they say the first 7 years is the key time. But I
Hmm.
mean, anything learned in those early formative years is something that can definitely be passed through in, our experience in life. And I've spent a lot of time unpacking that
Hmm.
childhood and being able to pinpoint precisely almost where a lot of my trauma responses came from, right?
Hmm.
One of the things that came up when I was expressing myself after my suicide attempt was me being honest with my parents about how I felt about the family units that they created,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And my father got up and walked out in the
Mm,
middle of that conversation.
mm,
On the back of that conversation, I was in private school at the time. He stopped paying my education. He stopped giving me an allowance, so I was
mm,
financially cut off.
mm,
What that created for me was an inability to be honest in any other relationship after that,
Yes.
because I had this fear that there will be a consequence. So I put up with a lot because I was terrified of expressing my truth to
Uh-huh.
someone who I didn't believe could handle it.
Right.
And as a result, I suffered heavily in relationships
Mm-hmm.
because of this dangling consequence that I had perceived as a result of the experience I had with my father.
Yeah.
And, and this at that time, I was in my teens. I wasn't a 7-year old. I wasn't, a young child. I was in my
Right.
teens, but I can pinpoint how that impacted everything for nearly 20 years after that.
Yeah.
Um, it, Being a parent, I think a lot of people take it lightly, right? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
let's be honest, a lot of people do the best that they can with the information that they have,
Sure.
the
Sure.
conditioning that they have,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a bigger responsibility than I think most people understand.
Yes.
Yes, I have to keep a roof over this child's head. I have to clothe them and feed them,
Right.
but I'm also responsible for their emotional well-being.
Yes. Yes. And it's difficult when you yourself have had trauma or abandonment during childhood because those things affect you in ways that you don't even realize. Even with myself, when my daughter was born, I was 25. She's going to hurt me if I don't remember this, but I, I remember her age better than I remember mine, but I think I was
Mhm.
probably around 25 or 26. So I was still young, and not just by calendar age. I was young emotionally. I had only begun intentionally trying to heal and grow probably 2 years prior to that. So
Mhm.
I was still very, very raw inside. But one of the things that I was aware of was, okay, I was treated a certain way, so I'm not going to treat my children that way. And I didn't. In many, many, many ways, I was the very opposite of the way I was treated. However, those parts of me that were unhealed still came out at times. And they would come out in times of when I was having a depressive episode. If it lasted a week, I was very distant during that week. I was not abusive in the terms of, saying mean and hurtful things and blah, blah, blah. And I would even still go to concerts and games and things. But if I was in the middle of a depressive episode, I was just mentally just like gone. I was neutral. And so there were things that probably came out in ways that I wasn't even aware of at certain times. And I think that's with sometimes as parents, we don't realize how what our parents went through and passed on, what we went through is being passed on, even if it's in subtle ways. Um, you see the parents that are just like so hyperactive and hyper, responsive with their kids, and oh, my kid's the greatest on earth, and my kid deserves to win a gold trophy every single time, no matter what. If the score of their game was 100-0, they're still a winner, and they get a gold trophy. They're overcompensating. They're overcompensating from something inside themselves,
Mhm.
and they don't realize the effect that that's going to have later. And me being a social psychologist, I like to look at things, on a bigger scope, on a cultural scope and a generational scope. And it's funny how you can see kind of waves through history when there were certain mindsets and beliefs that were going a certain way, and they have an effect, they have an impact, and a generation or two later, then you can see the results of those things. And then it starts a different shift in mindset and beliefs. So like right now, as we're talking, we're seeing the surgence of AI, and we're seeing the results now of too much technology, and we're just at the beginning of it. So, you know, 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, "Oh, look at the effect that had on people's mental health, on
Hmm.
cultural mental health." So it's fascinating, but yeah, as parents, you really have to take a look at yourself for your own good, and then say, okay, yep, I see this about myself. I know what I went through, what I've dealt with. I see the areas I still need to grow and heal in. So let me see how I can apply that to my parenting. How can I apply that to my child's needs?
Hmm.
And there's so many resources that if you're just intentional about it, about learning and growing, you can make the world of difference.
And I agree with you there. I think a huge part is that awareness. I find myself apologizing all the time to my kids. And it's not because, I'm weak or anything like that. It's just I want them to understand that I'm human too. I
Mm-hmm.
make mistakes. And when I apologize, I'm apologizing with an explanation,
Uh-huh.
because I want them to be able to see that there is accountability. And for me, a huge part of the issues that I had, there was no accountability in the parenting that I received, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never got an apology from my father, even
Mm-hmm.
after breaking down. Like I remember this was probably about 13 years ago, after stuffing for years my feelings, my anger, I had an opportunity to express to him exactly how his actions made me feel, and I was completely dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I promised myself then that I would never be that type of parent to my child. I
Mm-hmm.
As much as sometimes I might correct their actions. We have conversations about, why consequences are necessary in this moment. And, my children, I homeschool them, so they haven't been stripped of their identity or their opinion in any way. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I could turn it on. But
Uh-huh.
for me, that is essential. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But I have to be accountable. I have to be accountable. And I try so hard, sometimes in parenting, I don't want to hear back talk. I don't want to hear your excuse in this moment. I want you
Uh-huh.
to be obedient.
Mm-hmm.
But I think taking that time and allowing them to express, I think is so important. I may not necessarily agree and it may not change the consequence,
Uh-huh.
but I don't want to strip my children of their right to
Right.
express themselves. And even though they're still very young, they bring up some majorly important and correct points that I
Uh-huh.
am then left with, well, I can't really say anything against that, right? Like
Right.
there was this conversation one day and I told my daughter, I'm gonna take that from you. And she looked me dead in my eye. She says, Mama, it belongs to me. And you didn't even buy it for me, so you can't take it away from me. And in that moment, I wanted to argue with her,
Uh-huh.
but that was her setting her boundaries, right?
Uh-huh.
Like
Uh-huh.
I had to come from a different direction to sort the issue out because again I don't want her to think that okay, because I'm her parent I can do whatever. She doesn't have a right to boundaries, she doesn't have a right to her opinion. Now, if that was me 35 years ago
Uh-huh.
saying that, Lord knows, I would have been
Uh-huh.
grounded. I would have gotten a shoe. I mean, it like, but I'm
Uh-huh.
really actively trying to do differently so
Uh-huh.
that I can, first of all, teach my children emotional intelligence. I
Yes.
also being able to teach them how to advocate for themselves in a healthy way, because none of that was taught to me.
Right.
I came from that generation of children should be seen and not heard, and
Yeah.
I was a very opinionated child,
Hmm.
still very opinionated. Like I couldn't tell you how many times I've been chastised for having an opinion. So
Right.
those kind of things I'm definitely trying to reprogram and rewrite to give my children the tools that they need later on in life to be able to stand up for themselves, to be able to advocate for themselves without fear or hesitation.
Yes. One of the most important things, I think, and this is something that I've been working on for many years, you know, not just personally, but academically too, and that is the idea of resilience. Because, we've asked the question many times, like, okay, if we send two people into battle, why is it one of them comes back with PTSD and the other one does not? And there's this idea of resilience. And so far, that's one of the best common denominators that we've been able to find is that some people just tend to have more resilience. And sometimes it's seen as, well, you either have it or you don't. But when you start looking at people's circumstances and how they grew up, they were either intentionally or unintentionally taught resilience. And so learning to teach your children resilience is such a key factor in preparing them for life because you will not, you cannot safeguard your child from everything that's going to go bad in their life. They're going to have heartbreaks. They're going to have bad relationships. They're going to lose jobs possibly. They might have health scares. You, who knows? That's the world goes around every day and there's rain and there's sunshine.
Hmm.
And resilience is so important. Um, and so, yeah, just buckling down and doing some research and say, okay, well, what are ways to teach resilience? And it might be like you and I have in common that we weren't taught resilience growing up. We were just taught fear and abandonment and, emotional isolation and things like that. So it might be that we need to learn it ourselves a little bit better. And
Hmm.
so, and that's a great thing you can do with your child. Find a game that is one-on-one where somebody's the winner and somebody's the loser and teach your child how to lose.
Hmm.
Don't let them win because you think you're helping them. You're going to help them if you play the game honestly. They might win sometimes, you might win sometimes. But when you lose or when they lose, t that was a good game. You did a great job. I see where I went wrong. I'm gonna have to be smarter with you next time. Yeah, I'm gonna beat you next time. Have fun with it.
Hmm.
But teach them, say, oh man, I got you that time. You did good, but I won. You want to play again? You want to do something else? And there you're giving them, like you say, you're giving that opportunity for autonomy by giving them a choice, but you're not teaching them that it's something just horrible and unnatural to face ups and downs. And communication that you touched on, that's an important aspect of resilience too. You know, when you know that your child's been through something both good and bad, how you feel about that? How you feel about that? And don't be afraid to listen and don't think that you have to fix everything. It's okay just to listen. You know, we learn that from just our friendships, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes your friend just needs to tell you shit, just needs to
Hmm.
unpack some stuff and you just need to listen. And that's true with every relationship. So teach your children that. Teach them that you can just listen without correcting, without fixing. And all of that goes into resilience. So that's my TED talk for today is resilience.
I love it. And I also, as I mentioned, I homeschool my kids, and I started like formally very early. So my youngest was probably just going one, maybe like I created a classroom in the house and everything. The
Mm-hmm.
very first thing that I taught my kids before ABCs and one, two, threes was emotions
Mm.
and being able to accurately
Uh-huh.
articulate
Oh,
how they
yes.
feel. And
Good.
and that was so important for me, like having watching it, particularly, I mean, they're both girls, and I think girls are more in tune with the emotions. But
Uh-huh.
I've struggled for many, many years with the societal's desire for us to pack away our human experience.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And that includes packing away our emotions. I've
Yes.
also, because of the relationships that I've been in with men who don't know how to express their emotions,
Uh-huh.
I've suffered heavily as a result of a lack of emotional intelligence. And I
Mm-hmm.
just thought, if I can gift them anything,
Mm-hmm.
give them the ability to communicate their emotions in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And now when my children talk, like the other day, my 7-year-old told me, I'm incredibly frustrated with you, Mama.
Mm-hmm.
And it, as much as I don't want to hear that, it still gets me excited
Uh-huh.
that she feels so free in
Uh-huh.
being able to express her emotions. And like, that's what I want for the world. Like, I feel
Uh-huh.
like we can grow leaps and bounds if we can lean into understanding our emotions,
Uh-huh.
processing our emotions, and then communicating them in a healthy way.
Yes, absolutely. And when you have a trauma experience, especially in childhood, it stunts your emotional perception. So you have your self-perception, so what you think you're going through, what you think you're feeling, or better yet, what you think the circumstances are, because you're going to have the feeling regardless. It's not something you sit down and plan out and say, okay, yeah, this happened, so I'm going to feel sad about it, or yeah, this happened because I'm going to feel happy. Those things just come up automatically, but we have a skewed perception of why, and we have a skewed perception of what it's going to take to fix it. We want it fixed. So that emotional regulation, coming through a trauma lens, you want emotions fixed instead of experienced and understood and reflected upon. And that's so, and this is just being honest. And I mean, again, with my professional experience, people might tend to think, oh, well, you should have all the answers, you should have it all together. And, therapists, they should just be perfect people and blah, blah, blah. Same with doctors, you think, oh, well, doctors are doctors, so they should be 100% healthy.
Hmm.
But this is something that I struggled with, and still to this day, I have to work on. It probably will continuously work on it the rest of my life in some aspects. But I grew up with this anxious attachment style wherein if I felt hurt by my partner, I I would want to say something about it, but I had to come to a point of realization that one of the reasons I wanted to say something about it wasn't just because I was expressing how I felt. I wanted them to fix it.
Hmm.
And when they couldn't or wouldn't fix it, then I would hurt even more. And I didn't understand for the longest time why, you know, why are people in these relationships that say they love me, why are they not fixing these situations when I'm hurt? That was my expectations because of that childhood trauma, because of that emotional abuse and neglect. I wasn't just saying, you know, what you did really bothered me, or what you said earlier, that really bothered me, and just leaving it, just letting them know, hey, just being honest, letting you know how I feel. And if you want to be, if you want to discuss it, then we'll discuss it. Or if I felt it was something, seriously important that needed discussion, that would be a case. Hey, I want to discuss this. But it all goes back to the intent. And that's something we have to be, it's on the ugly side of healing. And the
Mm,
ugly side is being extremely honest with ourselves. And that takes practice. It takes learning. It's a skill that you can learn. But again, like for me, I had to get to that point where I was like, why am I saying something in this way or at this time? I'm wanting them to fix me. And they can't fix me. I'm the only one that can fix me. So let me work on that first. Then I can start learning healthy communication, healthy emotional expression. Just like with your daughter, it's okay to say, hey, that frustrates me. Yeah, 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 I'm extremely frustrated with you right now. And then the other person can say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I understand. Thank you for sharing. And leaving it at that. Or if it's appropriate, okay, is there is there something different you would like to see, or is there something you're not getting from me right now? And so there's a skill, there's a learning curve there. It's just when we have baggage, you know, things that are inside self-perception and world perception that's skewed, you just have to recognize that and say, okay, I know that I'm not seeing things clearly and not thinking things about myself clearly. So let me work on that. And you just keep taking those steps and keep taking those steps and moving forward. And you learn these skills. And in a few years' time, you're looking back like, wow, I've made progress. Someone said something or did something, and I didn't just immediately react. I took the time to process it. I took the time to say, okay, is this something I want or need to deal with right now? And if so, how, what's the best way? And so, yeah, it's a learning curve, and
mhm,
but it's something that we can all do with time.
mhm. And grace.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You definitely have to have grace for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jamie, I've really enjoyed this conversation. So before we wrap it all up, can you tell us how we can find you online and how you work with people?
Sure. My website is managingmentalhealth.net, and my social medias are on there, like Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, things like that. Please follow. I pretty much every day I'm sharing something, encouraging, some kind of information about trauma and mental health conditions to help people. So you can get a lot just from that. There's information on there, contact information if you want to reach out to me about uh, trauma recovery coaching. So I do that individually. And then the books I have on various mental health conditions are on there as well.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure that information is in the show notes. So, Jamie, before we close out the episode, one key takeaway for the audience to action.
One of my favorite quotes of all time. Oh, it's not really a quote, it's more like a parable, but it goes like this, and it's an old German saying: don't chase butterflies because they will just fly away. Instead, work on building a beautiful garden. Once you've built a beautiful garden, the butterflies will come. But even if they don't, now you have a beautiful garden to sit in.
Hmm, beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for your time on Survival Mode Disrupted, Jamie, and audience. Thank you for catching another episode. And I just want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I will see you next week. Once again, thank you for joining another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted, hosted by the Survival Mode Disruptor, Letitia. You didn't land here by accident. This conversation, it probably cracked something open on purpose because survival mode isn't just a phase, it's a pattern, an identity, a prison masked as strength. But here's the truth: you're not broken, You're just unfinished. So if something stirred in you today, don't ignore it. Don't numb it. Move with it. And I want to once again invite you to join Disrupting Survival Mode, the Facebook community where healing is loud and messy and real. I also want to invite you to buy my book, The Survival Mode Exit Plan, because your breakthrough deserves a blueprint. And if you felt seen today, be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and drop a review. That's how we amplify the voices that need to be heard. And remember, this isn't about fixing yourself. This is about finding yourself again beneath the rubble. Until next time, choose ease, choose power, choose you. This is Survival Mode Disrupted. Let's keep shaking shit up.